Hi, Mage fans. This is your host, Terry Robinson with Mage of the Podcast. Joining me this evening is author and person on a single-minded, one-person war to basically revisit everything that was seemingly done during the Year of the Lotus. Joining me is Sebastian. He is the author of In the Realm of Gods and Dreams. You may remember Sebastian visiting previously to talk about the absolutely magisterial and nearly totalizing rework of the Hsien, giving us The Hungry Dead. Information will be in the show notes. And because Sebastian only works on tiny projects about small corners of the game, this evening we are discussing the 331-page reworking of Land of 8 Million Dreams. Sebastian, how you doing?
I'm good. I've never heard the word magisterial spoken before, so thank you for that. And I do have to say it's 330 pages because the last page is the character sheet.
Which is funny because the inclusion of a character sheet in that single sweeping motion is like, this is what's separating it from the predecessor, because we never got a Land of 8 Million Dreams character sheet, and boy howdy did it need it. And I kind of want to do some internet archaeology to see what people did when they played it, because when Land of 8 Million Dreams came out, it was widely celebrated as like James A. Moore, Dina McKinney, and Wayne Peacock taking a heck of a swing and maybe not perfectly landing it. It wasn't a home run, but it was at least a triple. I don't actually understand the rules of baseball, so I hope that metaphor makes sense. But Sebastian, why did you do this to yourself?
Well, Land of 8 Million Dreams was kind of, I want to say it was like an earthquake in my adolescent consciousness. I know the phrase with the young folks now is, to the feeling of being seen. It's a complicated feeling to really, really be seen. So I know that Land of 8 Million Dreams is flawed system wise and in terms of some of the setting details. And, with my adult brain, I can see that very, very clearly, but I could never shake the way that I thought fantasy could be, that the things that you could portray. Growing up, I'm Asian American. I don't think I make any secret of that. But I guess I was a pretty sensitive kid, and I felt that I had to keep a lot of stuff to, deep inside. I don't know if that's kind of an affliction particular to Asian Americans in general, but expressing emotion was always very difficult. And here was this product, Land of 8 Million Dreams, and it helped that it was rare, so getting your hands on it felt very special at the time. And it just showed this world of operatic emotion and beauty, and there's a sense of grandeur to it. Again, not perfect by any means, but the way that it had resonated with me, I just felt that I had to revisit it. It had always been on my mind, even when I was working on Kindred of the East. It had always been kind of the white whale in the back of my mind. So I finished Kindred of the East, and that was a 200-page book. And I thought, oh my God, I'm so tired. I'm 100% going to take a vacation. Then, maybe a couple weeks after that, I was taking a shower, and then the idea popped into my mind. Here's how you could make Land of 8 Million Dreams work with an update. And I thought, oh, okay. That kind of spun and grew and became the concept of incarnation, which you'll see in the book. And from incarnation, then I was like, oh, well, if I have incarnation, then okay, well, I have to make this, and then I have to make that. And then 330 pages later, you have what you see.
It is strange how a single idea, a nucleation site, will imply the rest of a book.
Yeah.
In the same way, when a crystal starts forming, even those first few steps will reveal to you the necessary shape of its ultimate form, even though that could be hours, days, centuries away. So you had one of those. You had one of those kind of atomic moments where an idea kind of came to mind. Did this scratch an itch? Like, is there a sense of finality to it, or is this still very much in kind of that cognitive work in progress phase?
Gosh. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that idea of nucleation, because I'm in the process of understanding it right now. But when I came up with incarnation, and then it had to expand and become the project that it became. In the process of making it, I also came upon what I realized was a really important theme that I wanted to express through this book, which is that being in the world and being alive is just a gift. It's an awesome, awesome thing. Like, yeah, the nucleation point, at that point, it had been completely unconscious. I did not know that I was going to go there. But by the end, it became so clear that that was where I had been heading all along. So is the itch fully scratched? I don't know, actually. I really should take a vacation one of these days, but I can say that the scratch has revealed an underlayer that I didn't realize was there, and that understanding in itself is satisfactory. I know I'm torturing the metaphor, but
But I will say, to your previous point on the gift of being alive, one of the things that recurs about the book is even the terror in the golden world is beautiful. And
yes.
it is nice to see that. One of the things I dealt with when writing for Autothonia in Exalted is the idea that, like, I don't know about everyone else, but when I see a cogeneration plant or a nuclear power plant or a large manufacturing place, there is a beauty and design to it that I find quite stirring. I recognize the environmental externalities of it in a lot of cases, and we need to
Mhm.
frequently get better at dealing with those. But the degree of this is how it must be is something that kind of tweaks me. And one of the things that runs through your text is kind of there is a right order to things, and if one knows how to look at them, the manifold beauty of creation will be revealed in that process, and that this is a universal phenomenon. It can be experienced and understood and appreciated by all.
Yeah.
So I think we've done a remarkably high level passover. Let's jump in. So reading through this, one, I appreciated your loving note on the original Land of 8 Million Dreams. As you mentioned, the phenomenon of being seen. This is a book that doesn't make any opening shot. The phrase you use is special thanks to James A. Moore, Dina McKinney, and Wayne Peacock for the first round of fortunes that blessed us all. And the grace of that is just exceptional. The other thing to me is when I read a book, especially a D10 White Wolf whatever book for the first time, the thing that really tells me what the book is going to be is the glossary. In the same way that Oliver Sacks said that all good books begin in the footnotes, I think that all good RPG books begin in the glossary. And two terms struck me which were just like, shut up and take my money. Like, I need to finish this thing. I need to get through this. Was the first one was The Changeling Way, an artificial wheel of reincarnation said to be powered by the dream current, capital D, which enables those who pact with it to be continually reborn as human beings, an unparalleled work of magic. And that was just this holy shit moment. I can take that sentence and suddenly every Akashiana, every Euthanatoi, every mage that's interested in the cycle of reincarnation, I could run 10 campaigns just on that sentence. To be like, who are these weirdos who've co-opted this thing? What are they doing? How did they do it? How did they get this weird other magical powers? And what makes it an unparalleled work of magic? So that was just ridiculous. That was at like C. And then we get to Z. Zappathasura, a demon prince progenitor of a race of blood-drinking monsters. In the summer of 1999, he awoke and set off towards Burma to take the throne of the demon emperor, devouring his children along the way. Killed in Bangladesh by a coalition of supernaturals, after which he was given the title Herald of the Age of Sorrows. And I'm like, how dare you so thoroughly and creatively reinterpret one of the strangest things to ever happen in the world of darkness to A, mark it as the dawn of a new era, and B, recontextualize the whole thing as Zappathasura wasn't trying to bring out Gehenna as we know it. They just woke up and are like, I'm going to try and be Demon Emperor. Stop me if you can. And it turns out the way you stop a Demon Emperor is with nuclear weapons. So those were just two words, two things in there, because you took things I already knew and you're like, this is how I'm going to recontextualize them for the purpose of this book. Listeners, if you do nothing else than to look and thumb through this glossary, you will immediately be full of ideas to add to your mage game. That you have a bunch of mages that are vaguely familiar maybe with the goings-on of South Asia, and that you find out that Qingxi Huangdi kind of goaded Zappathasura to wake up to kind of make this bid at the throne in an attempt to knock out a potential rival. Later you have the line about, I can't remember it, in The Mother of All Stalemates. And just
Grandmother Witch?
Yes. Iron Queen, Grandmother Witch, and the oil-slicked Unnameable in The Mother of All Standoffs. And that was just something I stumbled upon, and I'm like, okay, that's a mage game too. Three sentences, three chronicles. If Sebastian can keep this up, I will never be done. So that's just kind of the opening that you posit. You also give three pieces of advice to players, and I am curious where these came from. Did these kind of appear fully formed, or was this something from refinement, or did you pick this up from somewhere else? And they were, people are more similar than different. Two, be careful about having games about people that are perceived as being oppressed, and it is more important to change course than to be right. Where did those kind of come from?
When I wrote Kindred of the East book, The Relentless Age, and it was still in draft form and I was having people read it for me, somebody said, What about the status of non-Asian people? And I immediately, I'm stuck in the world of the games. I'm like, oh no, no, there can be non-Asian, Hungry Dead. That's totally fine. He's like, no, 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 no. What do you do about non-Asian players? And I thought, oh, I have to write something. So the 3 points that you see in this book came from the advice that I gave in the Relentless Age to try and one, encourage people who are not of Asian descent to play anyway. I don't want anyone to not play because they feel that they'll get it wrong or something like that. But at the same time, I have seen how people could get it wrong. Yeah, I've been in a game store where a man talked to me at length about his like Chinese lesbian vampire ninja, OC and things like that.
As you
So
do.
I wanted, yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel all young gamers have that formative experience with kind of the weirdo who tells you too much about his original character. But in any case, I wanted to try and give a little guidance to people. And in the process of writing it, there was drafting, having people look at it, give me their feedback. And those 3 points, people are more similar than they're different. Be careful about minorities. And it's more important to change than to be right. Those three were the ones that had finally been decided upon. But really, I would say that the point two about minorities, I felt that's kind of a trend that I've seen where someone's like, oh, I want to play a Tibetan in China. And it's like, oh, okay, well, there's a lot going on there. But the third point is really the most important, which is, if you are not willing to change when someone says that you've done something wrong, then all the advice that I give you is pointless. Basically, like, I guess the 3 points can be distilled into one, which is be somebody who cares enough to have discernment about the people around you, and everything else will hopefully follow. That's basically it. That's the whole reason why it's there, to both encourage and to give light guidance without hopefully being too preachy about it.
And the second point is kind of important and can come up in and is a variant of something that comes up in a lot of games where, for instance, okay, your character took the 7 point flaw Dark Fate, which I think is actually a 5 point flaw or something like that. And frequently with very large flaws like that or highly character defining things, you run into the problem of if you don't look at them, then they are being underplayed. If you do look at them, they frequently become totalizing within a game.
Yes.
And it is very hard to put that knob. So that of advice is both reasonable and practical. And all of the advice has a practical element to it. Like, so you talk about people are more similar than different, and you're like, hey, a corrupt police officer in Phuket and a corrupt police officer in Detroit share a lot. So if you're not sure how to depict one, you can really start with the other kind of as a template, but you need to do that little piece. So we've gotten some of that basic advice out of the window. Let's talk about the world you build. You create a fantastic world populated with interesting characters. Let's talk about the characters. What do you get to play in this game, and kind of where do they come from cosmologically or cosmogenically?
Sure. So in this game, you are what are called the little gods. And by little gods, I'm referring to fairies, small spirits, immortals, which I think if you're not Asian, it's a little odd that the word fairy is often associated with people that we would maybe consider like Greek style heroes or something like that in the West. But yeah, all of those things are kind of under the umbrella of fairy. But to give it a mage context, let me try that. Say, you're a brand new recruit in, I don't know, the Order of Hermes or the Technocracy or something like that. And you are told that the world was once filled with gods and monsters, and now it isn't any longer. Right. And if you're a technocrat, then it's like, yes, that's good. But uh yeah, but that isn't the truth. The truth as posited here is the world is filled with bygone creatures, that the gods and monsters, they never left. They just became harder to find over time, both by choice because they don't want to be around a lot of dangerous people, also by fate because the spiritual makeup of the world has made it so that things are just harder for them to exist. So that means that in this day and age, only the worthy will find a unicorn, or you have to ascend a distant mountain to meet a celestial maiden because it's dangerous for them to be out and about. The human world is so fallen in a sense that we can't even see them most of the time. So magical creatures in the world of darkness, they're in their special habitats. They don't often leave. Sometimes when things get too dangerous, with deforestation, urbanization, that sort of thing, they'll decide to just leave to the other world the world of magic and they just won't come back. But the little gods, the ones that you play, are the ones who don't leave. They're the ones who want to be on Earth. They want to be in the human world. And in order to do that, and in order to be safe, to be able to walk around in cities and take subways and eat ice cream and do that sort of stuff, they undergo a process called incarnation, which allows them to be reborn in a mortal form. So that's changelings in the changeling, the dreaming sense. They can be like, if you've watched Death Note, they're like Ryuk, where they bond with a particular human being, or they bond to sacred places or to sacred animals. But always, no matter what they bond with, whether it's human or something else, it's because there's something in the mortal world that they can't let go. So they have to take the risk of becoming mortal in order to do so. That's what you are. You're a mix of an immortal and mortal being.
And you quite poetically talk about the thread that draws them back to the mortal world. That you kind of present this world where the gods are always looking for that line that lets them incarnate. And when it does happen, it is this momentous occasion. You posit 3 types of incarnation. What are they?
3. Oh, yeah. 3 broad categories within which there are subcategories. So there are human incarnations, which are the most common. So you can either merge with people who have recently died or who are dying, making a deal with them before their spirit departs so that you can use their body, or you can enter the body of a human who's yet to be born. So you merge with their spirit and you're born the traditional way. You get to live a full life as a human being from the very beginning. And then the third option is to find a human who has a deep need and to basically strike a deal with them. Say, like, we are going to share this body for however long we need to. And for that time, we are one. So those are the 3 human incarnations. So the second category are what I call the sacred incarnations. And these are the ones that they're very long lived. They're kind of removed from humanity by a certain degree because they merge with sacred mountains, shrines, rivers, that sort of thing, or they merge with animals, fish, with tigers and that sort of thing. And so that's the second category. Those, as you can tell, if you merge with a mountain, you're going to be there for a very long time if all goes well. So the sacred incarnations are kind of, functionally immortal in a sense, unless, they're killed. So they're kind of the guardians over the magical world, whereas the human incarnations are more out and about and doing all the stuff that player characters get up to. The third type of incarnation is called unhallowed, and that's when you incarnate, when a little god, a fairy, decides to take on mortal form. It's because they really want to be here. They have something they want to do, or they just want to experience life. And that kind of craving, if you're familiar with Buddhism, that craving, it propels us, but it is also the source of our downfall. And so when a god craves too much and they don't want to let go, and their incarnation is about to end, and they say, no, I'm not going, they can make certain choices, certain very bad choices, and they can stay and they become unhallowed. And we can get into what that exactly means later on.
And to me, I like that this sets up some wildly different paces of play. I always was wishing for there to be rules in Mage for the mages that, to overcome the barrier of death, decide to merge with a place, that decide to become the genius loci, that instead of investing their spirit in a phylactery or a soul gem or something like that, invest it in a great library or a coliseum or a place of surpassing natural beauty. And you kind of provide that. And the one other example we really have of that in World of Darkness, I guess we have 2. One are demons. We get rules for that in Devil's Due, where the demon can literally inhabit the sacred grove. And we get rules for that for the kami in Werewolf, which was always a really weird fit. One, that Gaia would call them the kami, and 2, they were surprisingly boring.
I don't even remember them, so.
Exactly. It was an interesting idea to say, hey, in the same way that we have drones, gorgons, and Fomorians, let's add to that the small quantity of Gaian spirits that infest places. And to me, as a mage person, I look at this and go, oh, this is an interesting way to wrong foot or to keep on the toes or to mix things up with a character who is normally animistic, who wants to talk to the spirit of the mountain, and they think they know how mountain spirits and earth elementals work or something like that. But now they come upon a little god that has taken up residence in the place, and suddenly that's the thing that they're dealing with. And they have this whole new worldview that they have to adjust to. They have to figure out what the entity's karma is. What are their kinships? Do they have a circle that works with the rest of it? For these massive scale creatures, are their time spans kind of equally long? If one inhabits a mountain, is it presumed that you're now playing a century spanning game?
It can be, yeah. So there are means for even the ones who inhabit objects or animals to take on human form through magic, and generally, that's what's assumed you're going to do. And at those times that they take human form and they're with the human incarnated gods, they can get into a lot of trouble, which can make their spiritual makeup a lot more precarious in that time. But assuming they survive, which generally, yeah, you can assume that, they can live for a very long time. But even then, even with these quasi immortal, sacred incarnations, they're here because they want to be near humankind. And actually, that gets me down to, since it's the Mage podcast, kind of the reason why you'd want to think about the little gods, if not to play them, to maybe to include them, is the question: who are you doing this for? So what I mean by that is, like, I've played Mage a few times, but forgive me if I get some of the lore wrong. But I know that, there's this huge war for reality, and there are these lines drawn, and it's a lot about, freedom versus control. It's about the dominant culture subjugating the less, the not lesser, the subaltern culture, and them trying to throw off the yoke of basically colonial domination. And that's all great. That's all very interesting, compelling stuff. But it's easy to get caught up in those broad strokes and kind of forget that, you, the mage, are a person with people and things that you love. Like, even if you are the loner player character, I don't need anybody, you probably have a favorite donut shop. Do you like the taste of coffee? Do you have a song that you like? These things are things that the little gods don't take for granted. They say, you are here. The fact that you can enjoy the donut shop, listen to the song, get yourself in trouble, these are gifts, and these are things worth protecting. And a mage, or a group of mages who kind of get caught up in the war for reality, they can be brought back down to earth, ironically, with the presence of a god who says, pay attention.
Also, like, each of them has an ethic baked into them, which you may interpret as being political, which you may interpret as a worldview. And I like the fact that this is a case of a line in a game where every character could want the same thing, but the whys could be radically different. And the ability to introduce an NPC or a player character of a different stripe that asks but why are you doing this? In a deeply considered way, I find to be interesting. And I like your comparison of things that you can only get here. I could see it as being the case of having a persistent reminder that the 22 cards of the major arcana who have the Spire of Tarot in the High Umbra may feel that they control the fate of humanity, but they don't know what a pumpkin spice latte tastes like.
Exactly.
And they can't in a very basic way. And if they could, they would be like, why are you squabbling about that when you have this thing? You play one of these living prayers. What is kind of the next set of choices that you make about your character?
You choose what type of fairy you are. That's really important. I'm assuming everybody who listens to this is probably a little bit familiar with Changeling. But in case you're not, there are different divisions based on, whether you are basically an elf or a troll or a goblin or something like that. Those same kinds of divisions are here among the little gods, but of course, keyed more towards Asian folklore and mythology. So those are called the kinships in this book. And those are your celestial maidens, your oni, the horned demon type creatures, things like the shinigami, who, those of you who know your folklore, they're kind of a recent invention. Japan didn't really have Grim Reapers as such until the Meiji Restoration. And I do go into that a little bit in the book. But you can play creatures from folklore, from mythology, from urban legends. That kind of colors the sort of magic that you are naturally capable of and inclined towards. And then beyond that, you also have your karma, which is analogous to, gosh, in Mage, I guess a little bit of resonance, kind of your philosophical outlook. The question again of why are you here and what do you think is most important? So Yes, karmas. So first, I should say credit where it's due. These were loosely based on the courts that were detailed in Land of 8 Million Dreams, though heavily adapted, kind of taking different inspirations and things like that. So the karmas, they are five different schools of thought about what should matter to the gods when they're here on this earth. Basically, the karmas, what really matters to them? Is it power and the exercise thereof? Is it, grandeur for grandeur's sake? Then you might agree with the ones that call themselves the Blood Garlands or the Black Sutra. Have you taken human form and you're a son to a mother, and you love your mother, and it's not really your mother, but you love them so much that you really want to be their son for real, and you kind of want to do that and not so much worry about the God stuff all the time, then for that time you might be what's called a dancing bell. Do you want to go hardcore on obeying the will of heaven, auguring destiny, and making sure that fate follows its proper course? Then yeah, then you'll be a lion of heaven. Or do you want to pursue radical change? Do you want to make crazy stuff happen in the world just to see what happens? Then you might be an uncrowned thunder. And then the last karma, the one closest to my heart, are the wandering pearls, who you would join them, you would see their point of view. If you see something in the mortal world that's either disappeared or is going to disappear, and you want with every fiber of your being to say, not on my watch, I don't want this to be forgotten, I want people to remember this, then you might be a wandering pearl. So I wouldn't say that these are the only five karmas to exist, but they are the big kind of categories that I thought were worth elucidating in this text.
And to me, as a mage player, I immediately look at this and go, okay, magic, but why? And I like the idea of mage characters doing the same thing, where they choose what do they believe the purpose of magic is. Why did we receive this gift? Which isn't quite the same thing as what a karma determines, but is somewhat analogous. The wait, but why? Or what is the good life? Like, what is your character's version of eudaimonia? And mage, we kind of have this cop out in the form of ascension, but it's also perfectly possible to change the game such that the concept of ascension, these are things where there will be a kinship. That doesn't mean that people will necessarily agree, but it does create these broad schools or ways of seeing the world that are quite useful. One of the things that struck me is when looking through the kinships, the kiths and changeling, I know the stories that they are based on or resonant with, and kind of mapping to dreams and such. Do you have any recommendations for people not familiar with the stories or ideas that the kinships may be based on to kind of get their hands around it? Or is it just one of those things, read the section 2 or 3 times and you'll be able to figure it out?
The kinships that are in chapter 2, and they are divided into celestial, earth-blooded, and dreamborn, which if you see the text, you'll see why that is the case. But those I picked because they're kind of the broadest and most applicable across all of Asia. For example, the Apsara, they are in China, they're called celestial maidens. So they have different names, but in general, these iterations exist. I would say to get a handle on these, I would say focus on these nine in chapter 2 because they're the most broadly applicable as far as the myths and legends that they come from. But keep in mind that if you're interested in this book, you're interested in Asian culture. If you're interested in Asian culture, you probably have a favorite thing, right? It often expressed itself in the writing of this book as people would ask me, are you going to include XYZ?
Yeah.
Right? And unfortunately, I couldn't include everything that people wanted, but I did. In chapter 6, there are as many as I could. So, like, are you going to include the Yuki-onna, the snow woman from Japanese folklore? Yes, I did in chapter 6. But for example, like, you could just take that one thing that you really like and turn that into a kinship, which I do give rules for.
And what comes with choosing your kinship? Having read your 2 massive tomes, the 2 things I would come away with if someone were to say, how does Sebastian build games? I would say, shit ton of innate powers, a bunch of stuff that you need to balance or things get fucked as kind of the through line through the 2 systems. I think that creates this fascinating game where your character is capable but constrained. When you pick your kinship, what are some cool things that you might be able to get with that? What does being a snow maiden let you do? Or what does being an Apsara let you do? Or what does being the one of my favorite illustrations, the one on page 68, the seemingly surly mall elf who is smoking and playing a card game?
Oh, I'm so glad you like that. That's an elf from the North Pole. Yeah, so really what it boils down to is what powers do you want? Then you can go from there pretty much. Kinships are defined through their concept right? So if you have a Yuki Onna, for example, you can just say, like cold snow woman, right? That's basically what they are. If you like kitsune, I know kitsune are very popular, right? Then you have like witchy magic fox woman, right? That's kind of basically what they are, right? They eat livers and hearts and stuff like that, but that's, beside the point. But yeah, details. But from that concept, the kinship has what's called the greater birthright, which is the magic that they can do, which is often very impressive just by being what they are. To use an example, in the earth-blooded kinships, which are they're analogous to yokai, to kind of earthbound god types, the kaibyo, which are the magical cats, their greater birthright is to be able to become a cat, and not just any cat, kind of a phantom ghostly cat that can behave sort of like a ghost and sort of like a real cat. And then there's other little things like by being a kaibyo, you automatically have extra dice when it comes to interacting with cats because you're the best of all the cats. Things like that. So
Skimbleshanks, the railway cat. Sorry.
Even if you use the example of the jinn, which are on the next page, if you're familiar with Islamic folklore, jinn are very diverse. But here, if you pick the jinn from the book, the greater birthright that they have is essentially to turn invisible whenever they want. And you spend your point of glamour and nobody can see you. Things like that kind of define what these kinships are, that when you pick that, you're able to do that reflexively with no thought at all, just a minor exercise of power. And so that's an important thing when you choose a kinship, but you also get a weakness, a frailty. So to stick with the jinn, for example, they have a frailty where if they have a current interest, a current kind of thing that kind of excites them or interests them, if they encounter that thing, I don't know, machinery, for example, even if it's not appropriate for the time, they have a difficulty resisting the urge to tinker, explore, and to kind of go in and take things apart or whatever it is that they want to do. So each of the kinships has that too. They have great power that they can exercise just by being what they are, but they also have a weakness that they always have to be mindful of. I think those are kind of the big things, and also appearance too.
Yeah, and the key thing though is the thing that you just associate with that thing, you get to just do. Like
Yeah. That was very important. Yeah.
Yes, and there's many of them. It's not like in the original Land of 8 Million Dreams. It's like you're surprisingly good at Sudoku, and I'm like, how often, what? How often is this going to come up? But here, you get a bunch of powers. You get a bucket of powers, and that I certainly appreciate. One thing I failed to mention when we were talking about the karmas is they all have cool names and everything, and you give like a bunch of karmic principles and so on. But the thing I loved were the example circles. What was it? The Iron Grandmothers that just wanted to dominate their little corner of the world, which is basically the game of Exalted, where creation is ruled by a cabal of grannies. I also liked the Daisha Hunters that just kind of went around and go, you're not really immortal. I'm going to prove it. And it's just like, One of the ones within the Wandering Pearls was Heaven's Hospice Care, that the idea is that like even gods die and your job is to record them. And I don't know about you, but that to me is a super compelling mage game where you have some very small area of the world that has some branch that is dying and their high umbral spire is crumbling. And just the goal of your group is to get those last stories before they go away, or to capture the last vestiges of this language that had a whole bunch of indigenous knowledge really baked into it. And the thing that I think separates this book from a lot is you are very generous with examples and alternative names and little glyphs and ways of reading it. The book is 330 pages plus a character sheet. It's only about 165,000 words, which makes it a little less dense than maybe some more contemporary books. But that's because it has templating that allows it and gives it space to read. And that was something I appreciated going through it, as opposed to like dense wall of text, full page illustration, dense wall of text. Whoever did your templating and layout up their game between the last book and this one, but I don't quite know what that story is.
Oh yeah, you should thank my wife for that. She really leveled up. We used Affinity Pro.
Oh, nice!
And,
Another member of the Affinity family.
You used it too.
Yeah.
It made this process really smooth.
They probably couldn't legally call the product FU Adobe, but so one of the things that the thing that inspired this was the idea of answering prayers, which never got described at all ever. Sebastian, you addressed that. in this.
Yeah.
You use prayer both as a thing, but it is also a system. And this I love because this is also something that we can steal for Mage. In that, if you wanted to come up with a system of Geesh that says your character regains power by fulfilling these ancient agreements, or you are some sort of faith figure and you replenish your sense of self by fulfilling the needs of your community. There's so many ways where this as a system could exist. What is a prayer, and how do you answer them, and kind of what's the little system behind it?
Sure, sure. Actually, yeah, that is key to understanding this. So this is a world, like I said, where magic is hidden, but to those who can see it, it's everywhere. And a key part of how that magic expresses itself, it's kind of, I mean, I guess I would call this, I mean, it's still the world of darkness. It is all the umbral realms that you know and all that stuff. But everything is interpreted through kind of a dharmic Buddhistic lens. And by that, I mean that desires are real. They have solid form. They're called living prayers. So, like when someone feels anger, of course, we as humans, we see the anger on someone's face. We know someone's angry. If you're a god, then you see that anger. It could be a red mist that emerges from their head. It could be a literal imp demon that follows them around and, says horrible things. And to those who can see magic, it is as real as your desk, as real as a car. And so the little gods, they live in a world where prayers have physical form and they also hear them all the time. They hear desires in the mortal world and elsewhere too. And it's always there like ocean waves. And as humans, like obviously, if we heard something all the time, it would probably drive us crazy. But as a god, it's supposed to feel comfortable. You're supposed to be awash in hearing all these desires and sort of picking the ones that you can hear the best and the ones that you want to answer, and you pluck them and you follow them and you find the human who's saying the prayer and you say, "Hey, how about I help you out?" And so that's kind of a prayer is a physical thing in this world, but it is the desires that we know, like make me rich, make me famous, make this guy fall down a hole and die, protect my family, all that sort of stuff. And by accepting a prayer, a little god can get the energy of heaven that they call glamour, which I mean that's a term of convenience. You can really call it whatever you want within, your language.
He
But
didn't call it chi! He didn't fucking call it chi! Anyway, sorry, what was that?
yeah, I chi is a useful way to think of it because it kind of flows, right? Yeah, but glamour is here it's the energy of desire, which to the gods is the energy of heaven, heaven and earth bound together. And so they answer prayers. And actually, I should clarify, in order to take an incarnation, you have to take a prayer. If you become revived, so you take the body of someone who's died, that person's ghost has told you, if you want my body, I want you to kill my husband because he killed me. You rise again with that desire and you think, okay, wish is granted. If you're quickened and you are born as a human being, that seems like you wouldn't have a prayer, but don't new parents always, it's like, oh please 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 don't let me be like my father, I want to be a good daddy, or oh please 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 let this be my golden child, please have him be successful, something like, everybody has these prayers that circulate around the birth of a child. And a quickened little god will have that prayer, kind of in them from the get-go. Prayers can, they can be fulfilled and then they're pretty much done, or they evolve or they change. But in order to keep your incarnation, a god needs to continually answer prayers. And that's kind of the deal that they make. And that kind of helps with I find with White Wolf games, the question so often is, okay, what the heck do you do? Vampire probably has the best time with it because it's, well, you gotta keep drinking blood. But even that's a little bit, it can be kind of one note. So that's the answer to, like, okay, you have this book. Thank you for buying it. What do you do with these characters? Well, you must answer prayers to be here. So get to it.
As you mentioned, it is a continual process that you always need to have it working. But one of the other interesting things about prayers is they're divided kind of into tiers. What's a level 1 prayer versus what's a level 5 prayer?
Thank you for that. Yeah, I should get into kind of the nitty gritty. The tiers for the prayers, when you design a prayer, which that's all in, I think, chapter 3. So a simple prayer like, oh my God, I'm so tired. Someone please watch my kids for the night. That's level 0. That's something that you can do in a day. As they progress from, level 1, level 2, level 3, kind of the scope of the petitioners becomes wider, or the people who are affected by the fulfillment of this prayer. So the classic level 1 prayer is, please make me a star. I want to be in Bollywood, or I want to be a singer. I want to be an idol. That's level 1. You have one person who really has this desire. You help them, hopefully get to stardom. And as you go on, like level 2 is maybe a family. Level 3 is a town, a village, so that's level 3 is the classic like village guardian type of thing. You say, I will protect you. And when I do so, I will get glamour for it. And then all the way to level 5 is when we're talking about the fate of a nation.
And how does that manifest? So, for instance, when it's the fate of a nation, is this just the process of the little gods kind of knowing what the nation desires? Is this tapping into some sort of subliminal consciousness? Or
Okay.
how do they know? Because one of the things that I thought was super interesting is we now have this tier of play that we didn't before. And like your character who is helping someone avenge a ghost, and someone else's like level 20 fighter wizard character is defending the entirety of Taiwan or something like that. And they look at each other and they realize they're doing the same thing, just at
Yeah.
wildly different scales. That I found kind of compelling. So how do these higher level things manifest? I can see a person going, a la Disney, going, I'm wishing. But what does that mean for larger and larger groups?
When we're talking about the fate of a nation, the example that I give in the book is the electrification of Japan, which happened in the 19th and early 20th century. It's an amazing feat of engineering that they did. In order for the gods to kind of get clued in that this was a desire, what happens is they can receive audience directly with a living prayer that is manifested as a result of the collective desire.
That's something I now want in Mage. I want these desire spirits walking around in the high and middle Umbra, that characters can use it, that your NWO agent can use to figure out what people's worries are, to see how concerned people are about crime in their neighborhood, that your syndicate mage now has a reason to go to the Vulgate or something like that, to find out there's a spirit walking around. People are complaining that chocolate doesn't taste as good as it. Like, it covers the spectrum of the stupid to the profound. And just kind of these desire spirits being made manifest, and that is now a type of entity you can have in your game is pretty fascinating. But anyway, sorry, I interrupted you talking about level 3
No,
prayers.
no. Actually, yeah, if you had those kinds of things in your game and you were thinking about using the universe as posited by this book, in the realm of gods and dreams, they would just be walking around. No need to go to the astral. But we can get into kind of the cosmological stuff in a bit. So a level 3 prayer, for example, if you are going to take on a prayer to guard a village, there is going to be a living prayer that represents the village, or maybe a few of them, because you are a god. They can sense that you're a god, and they'll come to you and say, please, please, please help us. So these little gods, they have these things called forms, which are kind of sort of a measure of their godly divine aspects. And the higher that those ratings go, the better that they can hear certain prayers, but also the more that they are a beacon to certain kinds of living prayers and spirits and stuff. So if you have a very high wrath, then you're going to have demons and angry spirits saying, like, hey, I'll bet you can help me kick this guy's ass, that kind of thing. And so, in a sense, like gods don't even have to go looking for prayers. Prayers will come looking for them. But there's also a sense in which destiny plays a role. So, in the example of the electrification of Japan, the level 5 prayer, the Kappa who saw an electric arc lamp for the first time in Kyoto just went, holy shit, this is world changing. And something, like, I guess like a holy voice from on high says, like, this is a big deal, take it on. And that there's totally room for that sort of thing.
So this is a world where desire can be revealed, and I like the idea that, again, that there are mages that know how to interface with this, either to find out what a community wants, or being like, hey, my chantry doesn't actually have a node, but we're in regular communication with these wish spirits. And by fulfilling it, this is how we get back quintessence. This is how we get back willpower. This is also, I think, a foundation for a really interesting system that says you start fulfilling these high level wishes, you're going to find that subconsciously people don't have as much of a problem with your magic. It shifts subtly the cosmology, the kind of metaphysics of mage. But if you save an entire town, I like the idea that these wish spirits, kind of at a subliminal level, help people go, yeah, maybe he's doing something weird, but also he prevented our city from flooding. I'm not going to have a problem with the fact that he is summoning blue lightning elementals or something like that. So I think the prayer system is a gateway to systematizing a bunch of things in Mage where we're like, I don't know how to work this. Or suddenly you replace prayer with types of paradigm moving effects. So you come up with the thin end of the wedge. This is the small thing that convinced people. And level 5 in Mage would be like the Zarvargo incident, where in 1918 or something, an Aetheryte with a collection of infinite energy skyships demands that the world put down its weapons of war. And that was an attempt to do this mass paradigm shift or something like that. But I think the prayer system is a cornerstone to what can be a lot of neat stuff if a table wants that kind of semi-mechanical, semi-directed form of play, where, as you mentioned, it gives you the question of, okay, so what next? In your setting and your system for your characters, they have to kind of always have that prayer running around, or they threaten to lose their form. And if I recall correctly, as one of the stats increases, they also need to take on more or bigger prayers. I don't recall which off the top of my head.
Yes, as the glamour increases, they need to have a bigger prayers always in the chamber.
And another thing that strikes me with a lot of the text that you do, these kind of balancing things, very much remind me of kind of dealing with the ramifications of the power stats in Chronicles of Darkness. So we've talked about what you play, and we've talked a little bit about the world. You use kind of different terms and break the cosmos down in a different way. Would you mind describing one of those?
The cosmology is it's the world of darkness the way that it is known. There's no yin world, yang world stuff. The spiritual makeup of the universe doesn't change once you cross over into Asia. It's all the same stuff. It's just that things are kind of reframed in a dharmic context. So things are kind of put in the context of reincarnation and that sort of thing. So, for example, the underworld is still the underworld. It's just that if you are a little god, you're going to see it as the realm of ghosts, where people are reborn when they die in a state of craving. The spirit wilds, the middle umbra, they would consider that they say that's the realm of beasts, where people are reborn into animals and spirits when they live a life of instinct and reactivity. And it keeps going like that. And then you have the thousand hells. The human world is the best. As I said, it's the center. It's the center of the wheel where all of these things converge. But what concerns the little gods the most is the human world and how it connects to what they call the lower heavens, which to those of you familiar with Changeling would be called the dreaming. So the little gods, they live in what they call the golden world, and that is true reality as they see it. So all the magical creatures that humans can't see, all the magical, objects and environmental things that humans are blind to because of defilement. That's all real. It's all visible to them, and it extends further than people know by crossing into freeholds, and which are like the kind of like the border territories. They can go into the lower heavens, which is the kind of the shallows of the dream-like spirit world. Yeah, so the dreaming, it's arguably it's where desires come from. If you ask the little gods, you go deep enough into the heavens, the lower heavens become the upper heavens, and you're at the gates of what would be called, I guess, Arcadia, or the peach groves of heaven, the place that's been locked away in the modern era. The big thing that you should keep in mind is they don't see the world in terms of, here is the human world, and here is the gauntlet that separates everything, and you cross the gauntlet and you go, to spirit world XYZ. They see everything in terms of roads and walking and travel. You don't cross the shroud to go into the underworld. You look for the bridge that will take you down into the tempest. You don't cross the gauntlet to go into the spirit wilds. You follow a duck down to the bottom of a pond, and you get down there, and you'll emerge on the other side into the spirit wilds. It's that sort of thing. So if you decide to include little gods in a game of Mage, there's going to be that kind of disconnect to deal with. They don't see the world in terms of barriers and things to cross. They see everything as interconnected. You just have to know how to walk.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, for instance, the Irish afterlife was just kind of this place over the sea. Like it was a different kind of far away, and the ocean just kind of served as that barrier. And in the same way here, and I think we've all been wrong footed by a duck who told us that they would be able to lead us to the astral by going into a pond. I mean, who among us? But to me, the important part is one of the if difficulties with some of the Year of the Lotus publications is you're like, where the hell is this? Where cosmically do I jam this? And one of the other things that we get at A Land of 8 Million Dreams is that, like, the Umbra is, to incomplete Hsien, toxic. Do you maintain that, or how do you treat the little gods in the other worlds?
Oh yeah, that part I completely excise that. That's it's no fun, at the end of the day. They can go anywhere. It's just that the lower heavens, the dreaming, that's their home. That's what they're most comfortable with. They incarnate because they want to be in the mortal world. They're not necessarily itching to go back to the dreaming. This also includes the realms of the astral. Terry, last time that we talked, you mentioned in Kindred of the East, I said, that the astral was not a thing for me in any way whatsoever. That was true. I didn't think about the astral. Now I did. I did. I thought of you, and I put that in this book.
Thank you, Sebastian.
They're called the Guru realms. The little gods don't really understand them. They just know that if you walk to certain places, cross certain roads or bridges, you're going to end up in a weird place that seems to have been made by a mage or by some collective unconscious thing. So the example that I give in the book is the Inventium, which I think was in the mage book about the Umbra. I'm sorry, I forgot
In
the
both of
title.
them, actually, it's in both Infinite Tapestry and Book of Worlds.
Yes, yes, Infinite Tapestry. Yeah. So I include the Inventium, but whereas a mage would see it as, oh, crossing over astrally into that plane, a little god stumbles into it by accident and usually has a tough time understanding what's going on. They see it as, if you're familiar with Buddhism, like there are these realms that are created by the Buddhas, and sometimes they are just wild. Like time and space just mean nothing in the way that we conceive of them. And that's sort of the way that these are like the weird pure lands where the mages like to gather, and best not to mess with them unless you really, really need something.
And I like the way that you portray that everything is being connected, because kind of in a game sense, that's the way it works. How do I get from here to there? Like, people always, one of the most infuriating publications that has been made is the quote unquote map of the Umbra that I think was originally published with Werewolf. And I've seen the Spanish version I have kicking around my house somewhere. And it kind of implies that things can be in some reasonable way next to each other, but really it's more like a transit map. It's some locations may be physically proximate, but you can't get there from here. And I like the character's first interaction with a little god being, hey, we need to get to this place. And they go on this absolutely bizarre walk through a city that ultimately allows them to get to Stygia, that ultimately allows them to get to the Fortress of Government, that ultimately allows them to get to High Brazil or something. And just the entire time, the little god's just consulting their notes or talking to spirits or kind of doing, in my head, whenever a little god is seeing the fullness of the golden world, they kind of do this slight squint action. And I just see this character repeatedly doing that. And after taking some set of twists and turns, bloop, suddenly we're where we need to be. And all the mages are like, how the dink? And we also get the Floating Bridge of Heaven and Cat Island, which I thought were really interesting places. So we have an idea of what you do. We have an idea of what's out in the world. Kind of, what are the threats that you face as a little god internally and externally? Like, what is the little god version
Okay.
of hubris or banality? What are the threats from within, and what are the threats from without? One of the recurring themes that we get in Land of 8 Million Dreams, and if I come away with nothing else from that book, it is that the Hsien were delicious. And
Yes.
just everyone wanted to crack open a cold one. So for these types of characters, what threats are they dealing with?
Sure. So, I mean, of course, there is a spiritual threat, which is the reason that they have to incarnate in the first place, right? That's defilement, which we can get into. But I'm guessing that you're talking about the harvesters. Everybody wants to talk about the harvesters.
I think they're
um,
neat.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no. I really think they're neat too. And they're folklorically accurate because everybody literally wanted to eat the Monkey King, or not just eat him. They wanted to put him in a pot and turn him into medicine, which is something that you can do here. So one of the big threats is still the case across Land of 8 Million Dreams and this book. realm of gods and dreams, which is, yeah, that the little gods are very desirable. Specifically, parts of them are desirable. And humans, really anybody, but humans in particular, have kind of built this subculture of hunting down not just little gods who are incarnated, but also bygones if they can find them, other magical creatures, and butchering them and using their parts like the talons, horns, eyes, tongue, that sort of thing, basically eating those parts and then absorbing the magic for a short time. So it's a very kind of basic, crude form of magic. You cut off an elf's ear and you eat the ear and you have elf powers for a short time, basically. But kind of what makes, I think, harvesters really interesting for mage is that harvesters for mages, it kind of addresses the fundamental question that all mages, I think, can potentially face in a game, which is how equal is everyone really? How equal are all of the sentient beings of the magical world? You could have the new age kind of love and light and everybody's equal. Or, if you're a hermetic, you kind of believe that you have the right to order around angels and demons and bind them to your will. If you are a technocrat, you believe that you have the right to exterminate whatever you want.
I just like the fundamental breakdown of the factions in Mage of like, yeah, there's paradigm and culture and bullshit. Who do I get to kill and not feel bad about it? That's what I want to see in Sebastian's version of Mage. Sorry.
So the harvesters, they're a way to directly throw that in the face of players who are interested in exploring it. Like, you have these people who literally eat gods. They cut off their limbs or whatever, torture them in various ways, eat them, and get powerful from it. And of course, like, cultures will eat all sorts of things, right? But this is kind of inherently abhorrent. But if a mage, confronts a harvester and says, like, what you are doing is terrible, you're eating Tengu talons and it's just wrong, a harvester has every right to say, like, who are you, Mr. Hermetic, who binds angels and demons and treats them like slaves, to say that I am a monster because, I make no bones about the fact that I eat the fingers of elves or something like that. And you can get into that question of, like, yeah, how do you treat the magic world? Do you really want to protect the magic world, or do you just want to preserve it so that you can exploit it better? These are things that can be brought up through the harvesters. And you could also become a harvester too if you want to use those rules.
So we have the harvesters. What is defilement?
Yeah, so defilement. Defilement, I can't define what it is because I don't give a clear answer of exactly like where it comes from. But what I can tell you what it does. So what defilement does? Defilement is kind of a poison, a spiritual poison that primarily corrupts and twists the little gods, if not kills them, but it also lingers in the environment and can turn it into something deadly for them. And defilement is the reason why little gods and bygones, they can't easily survive in the world. Unlike in ages past, where it's assumed, of course, like if you play mage, like, oh, in the mythic age, gods and monsters could walk around freely. Well, why can't they do that anymore? The answer is defilement. With defilement, like bygones are in danger whenever they're not in their special environment. Little gods who are not in their incarnation, they have a very tough time being in the mortal world because defilement will just kind of stick to them like tar and eventually, poison them. For people who've seen Princess Mononoke, it's what happened to the boar god and then what happened to Sans mom, the wolf god. That kind of just all encompassing spiritual corruption that eventually takes them down or turns them into something monstrous. And it's kind of, defilement is kind of, it's very aligned with the human conception of cruelty, malice. As humans, and really any being can become more defiled. And with high defilement, you become a wretched example of humanity. You become, arguably inhuman. As little gods accumulate defilement, they start to risk having weaknesses and things like that. The classic sort of, can't cross the salt line, can't hear church bells, can't affect anybody who's wearing a rabbit's foot. Those sorts of things start to make little gods' lives very difficult as defilement rises in them. As defilement rises, they become less like gods and maybe more like demons, where the world that they presumably love becomes something that they can abuse and run ramshot over.
So we've talked about the basic powers that you have. We've talked about the world. The two elements to me are, what the dink did you do with the magic system? Is it still the case that if I'm facing south and wearing yellow on a Thursday, my dice pool is 17 times larger? What did you do with that? And what are the powers, the things you get to buy, in this case arts, among other things? What's that like? And what are some of the cool ones?
This is a free form magic system, much like Land of 8 Million Dreams. And I dare say it could be a competitor to Mage, but maybe you'll have to cut that part out. I don't know.
No, that's fine. We just want a world with more wizards in it.
The arts, they are elemental in nature, and they basically govern what the little gods can control. The little gods, when they're unincarnated, they are in their pure form, then they are magic, right? They just pull with their will and things happen. But when they take on an incarnation, they kind of lose some of that spark, they lose some of that raw power, and they have to compromise. And that compromise comes in the form of the elemental arts. So there are 8 in total. The arts are blossoms, embers, metal, shadows, stones, tempests, and waves. So those are the 5 classic Chinese elements plus a couple that I added in. Oh, and beasts, sorry. When a little god has an art, they control both the worldly expression of that art and what's called the subtle expression of that art. So if you have the art of metal, for example, you can control gold, steel, all that sort of stuff, but you can also control authority. You can control people's perception of you as someone who's powerful or someone who can make the rules. And all of the arts kind of have that duality to them. And the big thing about the arts is that the dot levels don't correspond to the power. So, in Mage, of course, like, you have life 1 and you can sense life, but you can't heal with life 1. You have to have life 3, I think.
Yeah, something like
Right?
that, depending on edition.
Okay. Right.
Mileage may vary.
If you have, the art of tempests, for example, which governs, air, you can use a scrying effect to like send your vision out with the air and see things that are happening from far away with 1 dot, right? Also with 1 dot, you can summon a storm. Also with 1 dot, you can create a dragon out of air. Also with 1 dot, and on and on and on. What matters is not the dots that you have, it's the amount of glamour that you pour into the effect. To scry with the air using tempests, that might require 1 point at baseline, plus a few more glamour points that you have to put in to kind of modify the effect, like if it's over a far distance and things like that. But whereas if you want to create that air dragon that I talked about, that would require 5 points of glamour at baseline before you think of anything else. Like, how long do you want it to last? If you want it to last for a scene, that's another point of glamour. Do you want it to be the size of a house? That's another couple points of glamour. They're constrained in a different way from the way that mages are. So if they have the juice, little gods can do a whole lot. The problem is getting that juice. There's a little bit of leeway in the form of fortunes, which is what you described, right? Like facing east, wearing green, that sort of stuff.
Doing
But
jazzercise.
that's also yes. But that's also limited. Basically, like, to get into the nitty gritty of the rules, you can use a number of fortunes per scene equal to your permanent glamour rating, which is going to be typically 4 or 5. So every scene you can remove up to 4 or 5 glamour points from the magic effects that you want to do, which gives you some leeway to do some cool stuff. But it's not like Land of 8 Million Dreams where you could make it rain fire over all of Tokyo or something like that. Yeah, I would say the emphasis, though, like, is not so much on random things. The way that the little gods should feel when a mage encounters them is more closer to what you do when you use foci, right? They do things that are appropriately kind of grandiose, that kind of fit the folklore of who they are. I don't know. Well, it should feel kind of emotionally intense in keeping with the gods. So, like, I don't know, Tara, maybe your listeners know there's a show called Thunderbolt Fantasy. If they know it, that's great. But there is a particular trope in that show where when a character is about to do something incredibly badass, there's a poem that gets read out that kind of summarizes their character, and it appears out of nowhere. And so you could have like I wrote down one of the poems, for example, the birds cried this morning to announce your death, but ignorant to their warnings, you have come here. So,
That's kind of
a
badass.
little god. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. But a little god, like in all seriousness, would whip out that poem and recite it before they do something. And it would all be in keeping with the way that they're supposed to be. So an encounter with the little gods, yeah, it should feel dramatic, kind of soap operatic, and just cool in that way, colorful.
And so this is kind of a factor-based system. What does
Yes.
increasing dots then translate to?
Greater power. So there are two methods for you to use magic. So one is a weaving, which is analogous to a rote. So it's easy to do those. You get a free fortune for using a weaving, so it's even cheaper. And those are like the practice spells. And then you have unleashing, which is basically build an effect, roll your dice, and pray that it doesn't go wrong, because it can go wrong. You either, much like paradox, you either have it go hideously wrong in the world, or you take it inside yourself and you grow your defilement to kind of contain the magic. As you increase in dots, your weavings increase their dice pool, and your unleashings allow you to have more control. The threshold of control before things start getting wacky gets increased.
And as you mentioned, it's a freeform magic system. You can build it. You have pages of recommendations and examples, and you go through, hey, this is how you would build the factors to get kind of where you want it to be. It kind of reminds me of the aspect system from M20 Sorcerer, which I appreciate. And those two kind of rhymed. We've talked about a lot so far. And so before we wrap up, are there any interesting bits that we haven't had the opportunity to talk to? Either a setting piece that you introduce, a consideration in play, something that you feel particularly proud of having figured out or put into text form?
So I would like listeners to know, if you were one of the early downloaders, and thank you so much for that. The book is now at version 2.1. That's the 330 page version that you should download if you want the latest stuff. This is not like Persona. I'm not going to continually release like updates. That should be it. Yeah, just so people know, it's version 2.1 that you should have access to. And also, that version from version 2 contains the rules for Half Devils, which is basically a backdoor port of Demon the Fallen, which maybe people will find interesting. So the little gods, right? They have a lot of enemies. They have harvesters. By extension, they have mages who they associate with harvesters, and they have the hungry dead who want to drink their yummy blood. But the half devils, who are basically demons who've possessed humans and have demonic powers. And they're sort of the foot soldiers and generals of the war with the Yama Kings, who are still trying to be, one of them's trying to become Demon Emperor, right? And it can't be all of them. They are the new kind of antagonist that that the little gods are dealing with and still don't quite know how to deal with. That's also something that, not only for games with the little gods, if you decide to play, but the way that I've written out the half devils could be interesting for mages as well. One of the key points being that half devils can get power from a human who swears, undying loyalty to them. Basically, a worshiper to a god kind of relationship. When that happens, they no longer generate prayers. They don't have desires that the little gods can hear or see. All of that energy gets redirected to their new god, the half devil. So a mage who is engaging with that sort of prayer system to maybe enact some kind of paradigm shift will see, like, okay, there are these weird cults that are kind of rising up. That's something that they could get to the bottom of.
Another thing you do is you also, just as a by the way, include like a high level overview of literally every other night folk that we get information for in Asia. You're like, oh, by the way, here's a bunch of information on the Beast Courts. And I appreciated that you're like, no, we're talking about everything. Sit your ass down. And as Sebastian said, this is on the Storyteller Vault. It's 330 pages plus a character sheet. And it's only $10. It's only $10. It's only $10. Go get it. It has 7 ratings. And they're all 5-star. You just don't get that. It's only been out for like weeks to months, and you've already gotten like 4 reviews, which is unheard of in terms of text that has been received. The art is lovely. It is this weird middle point between Mel Yoran and Langdon Foss, which I appreciate. In a lot of cases, this kind of comic style, comic in the sense that it is black lines with white fill, as opposed to what we get in a lot of the World of Darkness until Mage Revised, of white lines that had mostly black fill. So it is lovely to go through. You did a very good job of of picking thematically appropriate art pieces, even if they weren't from that necessary game, which is something where I feel like a lot of a lot of authors kind of fail, where it's like, this is clearly a vampire illustration. Why is it in this werewolf book? There are custom glyphs for all of the groups. The lotus motif that recurs almost in some cases felt like either a stamp or a woodcut, which I kind of liked and kind of went with the border that had been created for the text. Before we tell people just to go buy the darn thing, is there anything else we should know about it?
If you buy this book, of course, I'll be grateful. But the takeaway that I'd want you to have is to think about what makes your world beautiful and here, and why you love being here. Because if you didn't love being here for some reason, you would be. For unfortunately, there are people who choose not to be here, and that's very sad. But that's sort of the thing. By playing the little gods, you're playing people who absolutely, positively want to be here, no matter what. And I hope that that translates into other games that you play and in your life.
That seemed like a fitting ending. Sebastian, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
This has been Mage the Podcast, where we'd like to think you're all little gods. The show is made possible by our executive producers. Join their hallowed ranks at patreon.com/Mage the Podcast. I'd like to start by thanking the oracles of the following circles of little gods. Ben Bendelow, Oracle of the Golden Insurrection, who once ruled the celestial bureaucracy and plans to take the gates of heaven and turn it to sawdust. Buck Gregory, Oracle of the Wizard Banes, who answer the cry of bygones hunted by mages and find combat against the Shinta thrilling. Christopher Phillips, Oracle of BGL48, the genius pop idols who use stardom to control media empires. Guy Stewart, Oracle of the Odd Family, a group of little gods all somehow resurrected into the same family. Mikhail, Oracle of the School Night Watch, the grown-ups overseeing a school entirely composed of night folk. Pukaji, Oracle of the Servants of the Mountain Master, little gods returning to their bodies, but who happen to be criminals and who plan to keep all of their promises to both heaven and their gangs. Sean Gallagher, Oracle of the Fur and Feather Delegation, a group fighting for respect amongst the beast courts. The crew of Erebus, Oracle of the Iron Grannies, little gods dealing with both infirmity and the world around them while becoming the secret masters of their neighborhoods. Jason Vines, Oracles of Redeemers Inc., a group of little gods who've monetized their knowledge of the flow of energy and are living very well while solving strange feng shui cases. Derek Semsick, Oracle of the Daitia Hunters. The world is full of false immortals, and the Daitia Hunters end them. And Drawn Cap, Oracle of the Snatchers, a band of tricksters who steal the greatest thing of all, a wizard's sense of security, along with Archmaster Andrew Edelstein, Archmaster Berto, Archmaster Brad the Blue, Archmaster Dan Svensson, Archmaster Leroy Bryce, Archmaster Morgan Aran, Archmaster Nathan Weaver, Archmaster Simon Strand, Archmaster Wolf Larison, Alex, Alexia, Ambiversion, Andrews S., Blaze Hibbert, Blake Ryan, Brandon, Bryce Perry, Bub the Pale One, Chris Blake, Sig, Curtis Hendricks, Daniel Cuppin, Daniel Scribner, Darren Hennessy, David McFall, David Roy, Dennis Osborne, Ian Robertson, Eli Levenger, Eric Schwank, Fraggerock, George Lara, Gray Trillig H., Henry Kraft, Ia Bolt, Jason Duncan, Jason Kennedy, Jason W. Briggs, Jeff Bryn, Jenna F., Jervis Johnson, John Magnuson, Laws and Stuff, Kathleen Halperin, Kevin Fitzpatrick, Chris Kinner, Leslie Weatherstone, Manel Canos, Matthew Prohl, Maurice Hopkins, Melissa Krause, Michael Creedle, Michael Parker, Nibero, Neil Patterson, Nikita Klamanoff, Patrick Mulder, Rachel Grace, Ricardo, Richard Bat Brewster, Robart the Robot, Ryan Stray, Rob H., Ryan Kendi, Samuel Tobin, Sev Nessus, Starfish, Stephen Carton, Steve Wynyard, That's Real Nito, Tyler Bryan, Vincent Hamilton, William Connolly, William Martin, and Will Vincent. Our EP shout-out this episode is to Curtis Hendricks, and in honor of Hendricks, some facts about gin. It was originally sold as a medicinal tonic in the 16th century by a Dutch physician, Franciscus Sylvius, who used it as a remedy for kidney disorders. Juniper berries, the primary botanical ingredient, were known for their diuretic properties and thought to aid in treating ailments. Its Dutch origin is why it is sometimes referred to as Dutch courage. In 18th century England, gin was cheaper than beer and widely available, leading to an era known as the gin craze. People drank gin in excess, leading to widespread public drunkenness and social issues. The government had to intervene with the Gin Act of 1751, which placed restrictions on its sale. Gin was considered to have partially helped invent the cocktail party when, during Prohibition in the United States, gin became a popular spirit in illegal bars and clubs. It was easy to produce at home, though quality varied. People started mixing it with fruit juices and other flavors to mask the rough taste, giving birth to many gin-based cocktails and the concept of the cocktail party. Bathtub gin was often produced in large quantities, sometimes using bathtubs to mix ingredients. This gin is frequently poorly made and can be dangerously toxic due to impurities, yet was a staple of speakeasies and underground parties. The world's strongest gin is Anno Extreme 95, which is 95% alcohol by volume and is sold in small bottles for safety and must be diluted heavily to be used in any drink. I just don't know how that works because that implies you only have 5% for actual gin taste. And finally, gin has been linked to sadness. Historically, gin was known as mother's ruin because of its association with depression and social problems. Some believe it enhances melancholy emotions, though this effect is more myth than fact. Still, it's why gin is sometimes called the melancholy spirit. Curtis? When I think of my favorite gin cocktail, which is probably the French 75, I'll think of you. If you super liked this episode or super didn't, drop us a line at matesthepodcast@gmail.com or matesthepodcast.bsky.social on Bluesky. We have a hop in Discord community at discord.me/matesthepodcast. If you enjoyed it, please review on the platform you're choosing or tell a friend about us. Also go to matesthepodcast.com for show notes and all of our previous shows. Now go change reality. Bye.